Unions have played a major role in the politics of this country for a long time, but today the scene is changing. We have seen changes in Wisconsin and attempts in several other states. Guys, what are your thoughts about what is happening in this country in terms of unions?
You know, I feel that the country is going in the right path. You know, I have read a lot about unions, and I have been informed by a lot of people about unions, and I completely agree with the reason why the union is the union, because corporations are what they used to be. You know, there's some corporations that used to be these, you know, great people that, you know, worried about their workers and stuff like that, and now that doesn't really happen anymore, and you need to have unions. However, I've noticed that the unions have just become so power hungry and so, you know, money grabbing that it's costing, you know, states with the state unions incredible amount of money, and in my opinion, waste of taxpayers' money.
John?
Yeah, yes, it is a very important issue right now. I think it's also an issue that's been kind of localized lately, but it's reaching a national level now, as we talked about last week, Indiana, Wisconsin. But at the core of this is, you know, we have this growing political power with unions that are, you know, they're using the political process. And so is that so wrong? We also have major budget issues that everybody is having to deal with. I think it's really a hot button issue now because, you know, conservatives want to say, okay, we want to get rid of some of the unions, and they are really maybe alienating some of the independent voters that you know, are benefiting from union membership. And also, this country has a history of a developing middle class that kind of developed at the same time that the unions started to form. And so there's just this given belief, and I believe it, that you know, there are more people in the middle class because of unions. And so when you say we don't need them, then you're saying, you know, how much concern do you have for the middle class? So it's a tough issue.
I think for me it really comes down to two things. It comes down to the difference between private sector unions and public sector unions, because in my opinion there is a huge difference. A private sector union sees the spreadsheet, the balance sheet of the of the company, and they say, okay, this is what we can do and this is what we can't do. But in public sector unions, there is no accountability. You can't see the numbers because the numbers are the taxpayers. So you can't see, okay, if we do this, the taxpayer is going to go broke. Not like a company where they would go bankrupt. And this is my problem. I have no big issue with private sector unions. It's public sector is where I feel it takes away from the taxpayer, and that's what kind of leads to these problems that we're seeing in Wisconsin. And we're seeing in a lot of states that's passing legislation that's called right to work, which is gives people the opportunity or the decision of whether they want to join a union or not. And that's really what's going on in this country, including Indiana.
Yeah, you know, I agree with you. However, the United Auto Workers, in my opinion, it's an organization that is not a very nice one. You know, I cite a investigative news story that was done on the Minneapolis car plant, or whatever it is. The Ford plant, yeah.
Ford plant?
St. Paul Ford plant that they did a couple years ago, actually quite a few years ago, where they went up to the fence and they saw drug dealers selling the workers pot, and a whole bunch of the workers were drinking on site. And when they released the news story, instead of the United Auto Workers, you know, apologizing and saying, hey, we didn't know that our workers were doing that, that's unacceptable behavior, we shouldn't do that, the United Auto Workers got very mad and said, you can't do that about our workers, that's their own right. I'm like, no, you don't have a right to be drinking when you're making my car, you don't have a right to be smoking pot when you're making my car. I mean, and that kind of just automatic negative behavior just infuriates me, and I don't think that the United Auto Workers need to, I think that they should lose some of their power.
Yeah, you mentioned the public sector unions. I mean, you know, that requires an entire rethinking, because, you know, the federal government isn't always there to turn a profit. You know, there are some needs that have to be met as a society, and if that's a role of the government, and you know, we can debate, you know, state and federal, but the reality is the government has a role, and I don't know if the government is going to decide on different issues that we want to provide a service, then I'm not so interested, I guess, that they're the most profitable, because we deem that to be a service that we need to have. I really think it's really tough to deal with this issue, you know, at this time because of the politics that are going on. There are a lot of horror stories out there, but at the same time, you know, the unions are a big part of middle class America, and when you look at the framework of this election season and a lot of conversation, it's around middle America, middle class America, and so if that's part of it, then, you know, just a blanket, we need to get rid of them. You know, I wouldn't buy into that. You know.
Now, another aspect of unionization is the power, as we talked about, politics. Now, unions have backed the Occupy Wall Street movement. They've been largely behind the, obviously, recalling Scott Walker. I mean, what do you guys feel, quickly, about their power in terms of politics?
I think that both public and private sector unions are just like major corporations. Major corporations spend a ton of money on backing political candidates, and unions do the exact same thing. And I think it's a corrupt practice. I think it corrupts politicians, even though politicians are already pretty much corrupt as it is. And I think they have way too much power.
Yeah. You know, I think they have a lot of power, but they're not the only ones. You know, with the movie industry. Movie industry has a lot of power. They're not the only ones. They're just playing the game very well. I think in the long run, somebody like Scott Walker, he's either going to be he's going to disappear from the national spotlight if things don't go well. If they do, he'll be a very important person that people are going to call on to see how to get this done. And I think the jury is still out on how that's going to go right now. You know?
Yeah, well, I think only time will tell what the voters of Wisconsin think about Scott Walker, but we'll be right back with more after this break.